Hi, I'm Sarah Elizabeth Cornejo, and I'm a visual artist. I'm currently enrolled in an MFA program at UNC Chapel Hill. I got my BA from Davidson College in English literature and art, which affected my motivations to go to grad school. I felt that fiction in particular was a moment where people had to use language and reorganize it in a way to really speak something very personal. And those moments of truth and those instances of using something as common as language in a way that became original and became fresh was really inspiring to me to make visual art. So in my work, I guess I would say that it has been a continuous struggle to try and find the right way to be able to talk about my subject matter. So in trying to talk about women, I was first struck, I was in college, so women are learning kind of how to be women. It's people's first relationships, the first time they're away from home. There's like a lot of new stuff happening. And as I bonded with these different women that I was surrounded by, these small truths would come out about shame they were experiencing or things that were really wrong in their relationships with men or their relationships with their approach to education or approach to the things they wanted. There were just little nuances and little moments, whispered moments that they would say that just are so heavy and so indicative of what women are faced with, what women are up against and what we internalize and what we're having to overcome in order to achieve, what Sor Juana Inés had to do. And from that, in trying to make work about those whispered moments, those spaces are what I'm most interested in. And whatever that calls for, whatever material I feel fits that. So in talking about 100 Years of Solitude, it had to be natural material. In talking about something like love, it has to be very fluid. And talking about daughterhood, it had to be something very controlled. So the medium is really important as a way to reflect what I'm talking about. So I have to be honest, I had never heard of Sor Juana Inés when I was first approached, and I did a lot of reading about her, and of course at first it was sort of like another woman who did these things in history who no one knows about now. Another instance of women, having this big voice and this bravery that does not, their name is not remembered in a way. But then I was really interested in sort of the nuance of her story and the back and forth, because what she did was so courageous and so, I don't even want to say unique, because there are other women that are doing it that we probably don't know about, but I guess brave would be the word that I would settle on. And this sort of decision, everyone comments on, well, she decided never to marry though she had many suitors, and there's still this it's even more amazing that she chose this role because she was good looking and decided not to marry anyone. And just that's a very easy moment to latch onto, but there's so many details to her story that even now we're going back and forth on about her decision to marry, her decision to never have children, her decision to educate herself. And I think the fact that we could have a conversation like that about so many different points in her life is so relevant to what women are still battling now. This question of being a vessel, a potential mother, an existing mother, a future, those are all things that we're still battling with even as modern day women. How do you have a career now and still be not just a mother, a good mother? So I love that those conversations happen by looking at her story, and I think it's such a wonderful example for the importance of work about women like that still, and bringing those women into the current conversation to show that we've come a long way, but we also haven't come that far. So in beginning any new piece, I always look to literature, not necessarily because of the story at hand, but in terms of, for example, 100 Years of Solitude. The entire novel is written so beautifully, and his Marquez's word choice and his scenarios that he presents are so strange and part of this world and part of another world. But I was most inspired by, for example, Ursula Iguarán, who exists throughout the entire novel and spans really the entirety of her family's presence. So over this 100 years, and ends up kind of disintegrating, and she's climbing around this house blind and death at the end, and she's a character in the tale, but is not the focus of the story. But her presence, like that persisting feminine, was so inspiring to me. And that, for example, I wanted to make a piece based off of her, out of these raw organic materials, like nothing synthetic. So for a two-dimensional piece, it would be the same thing. Even something as commonplace as Cinderella and the fairy tales. These accepted stories that we're all fed as children, those are things that shape the way that we view our place in the world and the identity or role of women that we then follow. There are so many details that are problematic and deserve to be addressed, particularly just in that tale alone, like in evaluating the relationships of Cinderella's mother to Cinderella to, it's this tale of what does it mean to be, or valuing the demure feminine, or like the forfeiting of any agency, or this reward for good behavior, quote unquote, non-reactive behavior, and just sort of exploring like what are the messages being given to girls by reading the story and internalizing the story. And not just that, but there's so much in our literature that is so representative of our society and what we're fed and what we internalize and then take on without even really being aware of how much we absorb. So I'm really excited to show these new sculptures that I'm calling halfies, because it's my most recent work and also my least understood work for that reason. And it's a very new technique for me. Sculpture is very new for me in my vocabulary. And in making them, I didn't want to have to make decisions about their color or their texture or their shape in a way. So I wanted to use all natural materials and have it be sort of the earth, but otherworldly and kind of between human and like insect or animal. And so they have cicadas, they have scales from an alligator garfish, they have all these found materials that I have collected myself just walking my neighborhood or have been given to me. And I think what means the most to me is when I'm telling people about these sculptures, or when I'm telling people about what I'm collecting, or they see me in the neighborhood, I'll come home at the end of the day and there's a butterfly, or there's a few cicada wings, or someone mails me a box of fish scales or something. Like there's these odd gifts, but the offering, there's just something so like dear to me about that connection and someone thinking of me when they see that and wanting to be a part of it. So when making them, there's this memory of all these people that have given me these materials, and it becomes something so beautiful out of these discarded shells. So it's nothing, I've never killed anything that goes on the sculptures. There's just these things that are almost debris that I've reclaimed. And even using the pig intestines, which is what I used for the skin, I had to go to a Latino meat shop. It's the only place that they would sell them to me. And when I walked in, all the women sort of ran away from me, and I couldn't figure out why. And I realized that no one spoke English, and they assumed that I didn't speak Spanish. So when I started speaking Spanish to the butcher, he kind of quietly was like, "What are you doing with this? Like, you don't need all of these." And I explained it, and he thought it was just so nice to make that connection and like have this relationship. I go back and I get them there, and they know exactly what I'm doing. And so there's a community aspect to these pieces that I haven't figured out what it means to me and how I'm going to address it and use it in my pieces moving forward, but that is really special to me. In each piece that I do, I'm exploring one moment of truth. I'm exploring one experience, and I don't want a piece about motherhood to be representative of motherhood as a whole. I'm talking about one truth. And with all of those pieces, once it's done, it's still lacking because there's so much more to be said. And I would never want, my goal is always a place of contemplation, a place of reflection, whether that's personal, whether that's expressed. I would love for people to be able to see someone else's truth and reflect on that truth within themselves. So I always hope for a personal response, just perhaps a new way of seeing what has been so accepted, and that hopefully calls for some reflection. So in My Mother's a Fish, I had just read As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, and I was reading the poetry of Sharon Olds at the time. So two very different works of literature. And there's one chapter in As I Lay Dying that literally just says, "My mother's a fish." And through this whole novel, they've just been carrying her in a coffin from one place to another. That's what the story is hinged on, I guess. And Sharon Olds wrote this collection, Satan Says, that goes through her experiences as a daughter, through her experiences as a mother. And in the part where she's a new mother, there's a series of poems called the New Mother Poems. She talks about the baby being the cream inside her skimmed off. And I love that idea of thinking of the richness and the good and like the fat of you, the substance of a woman being skimmed off, being given to a child. And in thinking about my mother as a fish, that line, thinking about the natural world, which is really important to me in my work, and the way that, you know, like salmon spawn and then die. So that like the entire purpose or role of someone's life would be their children. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, but I did want to reflect on and comment on the fact that women are expected to, once they become a mother, that's it. Like they are a mother, they're not a wife, they're not a daughter, they're not a self. They have to exist or jump from one identity to another. So there is any sort of move to preserve like an essential self or preserve something of their own is viewed almost as selfish. Like it's not enough to be a mother, you have to be a good mother, you have to give everything that you have for your children. And I don't have an answer to that or an angle that I want people to see, but I do want to talk about what would that feel like to have to forfeit your dreams or any things that you still wanted for yourself, any personal desires or goals. And I don't think that's selfish. I just want to create a space where that is reflected on and seen. So in thinking about this show and conversations that I've had prior to it, I'm really excited that this is a community-based show in a way. It's for the community. It's meant to be very accessible because I do think that art can be very pretentious and isolating in a way to a certain group. And I do think that art is a way to communicate beyond words. Like we can feel and have empathy in a way that we can't express. So I would hope, as I always hope, that my work in it provides a space of reflection or provides sort of a safe, even if it's just one person within their own head, allowing it to let them look back on their experiences as a woman or the women in their lives and see it in a different way and have empathy, if nothing else.